Picture the last time you left a conversation feeling smaller than when you walked in. You said the right things. You were reasonable. You kept the peace. And somehow, you still left feeling like the problem. That feeling has a name, and it is not weakness. It is the symptom of a man who was never taught the rules of the game being played around him every single day. Here is what nobody puts in the motivational videos. The world does not reward good intentions. It rewards strategic clarity. The universe is not cruel. It is simply indifferent to the unprepared. You have been walking through rooms where everyone else could see the board, and you were the only one who didn't know you were a piece on it. That ends today. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to dismantle 7 beliefs that have been quietly controlling your behavior. Beliefs installed in you before you were old enough to question them. I am going to hand you the architecture of a man who operates from a position of quiet, unshakable power. Not rage, not arrogance, not the hollow chest puffing of a man who learned toughness from the wrong teachers. Real power, the kind that makes people instinctively listen when you speak. The kind that makes rooms shift the moment you walk in. The kind built from the inside out, on your terms. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the end of this, you will not just have information, you will have a new operating system. Let me tell you something that the self-help industry has completely backwards. They want you to move on, fast, heal quickly, process it in a journal, and get back out there. They act as though your suffering is a malfunction to be corrected, a bug in your code that needs a patch. They are wrong, and that wrongness has cost you years. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and spent decades studying human resilience, discovered something that modern psychologists keep reconfirming. It is not the absence of suffering that produces the strongest people. It is the relationship with suffering that determines everything. In Frankl's framework, the men and women who broke were not those who experienced the most pain. They were those who could find no meaning in it. The ones who survived, mentally, spiritually, psychologically, were those who refused to let their experience be pointless. Your pain is not pointless. Every moment someone used your trust, every time you poured yourself into a situation and got exploited, every relationship that revealed itself as transactional, those were not punishments from the universe. They were calibrations. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. It is real, it is measurable, and a landmark study by Tedeschi and Calhoun found that between 30 and 70% of trauma survivors report positive psychological change as a direct result of their ordeal, not despite the struggle, because of it. Think about carbon. In its normal state, it is soft. You can smear it across a page, but subject it to extreme pressure and heat, and that same carbon becomes a diamond. The material does not change. The conditions change it. You are the carbon, and what you went through was the pressure. Here is the exercise I want you to do tonight before you sleep. Take a piece of paper and draw 2 columns. In the left column, write every painful experience from the last 3 years that still has weight when you think about it. Every betrayal, every humiliation, every moment you were underestimated. In the right column, write what that experience forced you to learn about human behavior, about yourself, about the way the world actually operates. Not the lesson you wish you'd learned, the real lesson, the uncomfortable, unromantic one. Most people skip this step. They either wallow in the left column indefinitely, or they run so fast toward the right that they never actually extract the lesson. Both are wasteful. The counterintuitive truth that most men never access is this: your most painful chapters are your most valuable competitive advantage. Because the man who has been lied to and learned to read deception, the man who trusted completely and paid for it with his peace, that man develops a kind of situational awareness that no seminar, no book, no mentor can install. He earned it. You earned it. The question is whether you are going to let it rot in the soil of resentment, or whether you are going to let it grow into something that no one can take from you. One warning before we go further. The most dangerous version of this lesson is weaponizing your pain against people who don't deserve it. Becoming cynical is not the same as becoming wise. Cynicism is bitterness with a strategy attached. Wisdom is clarity with compassion attached. Know the difference, or you will replicate the very damage that was done to you. In 1971, psychologist Walter Mischel published the results of his famous marshmallow experiment. Children who could delay gratification, who could sit with discomfort and not react impulsively, demonstrated significantly better life outcomes across almost every measurable category decades later. The researchers weren't just measuring willpower. They were measuring the ability to sit inside an emotion without being commanded by it. That skill, emotional regulation under pressure, is the single most underrated form of power available to a human being, and almost no one teaches men how to develop it. Here is what most people misunderstand. Controlling your emotional expression is not the same as suppressing your emotions. Research from neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett's work on emotional granularity shows that the problem is not feeling, it's undifferentiated feeling. When you can't name what you're experiencing with precision, your brain defaults to a binary. Either express it or suppress it. Both are destructive. The Audit man who has mastered himself does something different. He notices what he is feeling, labels it with precision, and then consciously decides what, if anything, to do with it. Anger. Specifically, anger at being dismissed. Specifically, anger because your contribution went unacknowledged. That level of precision gives you options. Undifferentiated rage gives you only one. Imagine this scenario. You're in a meeting. Someone takes credit for your idea, right in front of you. The room watches. Every reactive instinct you have fires at once. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing changes. The old version of you would have either exploded visibly or swallowed it whole and said nothing, then spent 3 days replaying it in your head. The man you are becoming does neither. He breathes. He notices. He catalogs. And he responds, if he responds at all, with the precision of a surgeon, not the chaos of a wounded animal. He might say nothing in that moment, not because he is afraid, because he is choosing the battlefield, the timing, and the terms of engagement. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, "He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight." Most men have completely misread this as a military principle. It is a social one. Every interaction is a potential engagement. The master of self knows which ones are worth his energy and which are not. Here is the exercise. For the next 48 hours, implement what I call the 3-second audit. Every time you feel a strong impulse to respond to a message, to a comment, to a situation, pause for 3 seconds and ask yourself 3 questions. First, what is the most accurate name for what I'm feeling right now? Second, what outcome do I actually want from this? Third, does responding right now serve that outcome? 3 seconds. 3 questions. It sounds simple. The results are not. Most of your reactive behavior happens in the gap between stimulus and response. You are going to start living in that gap. The counterintuitive insight here is that silence is not passivity. In every culture on earth that has produced great leadership, from Japanese business culture's concept of ma, the meaningful pause, to the Stoic Roman Senate's culture of deliberate speech, the ability to not react has always been considered a sign of the highest capability. Weak men speak to demonstrate that they have nothing to hide. Strong men are selective with speech because they understand that every word is a broadcast. What you say, and when you say it, tells observers everything about your internal state. Master the internal state. The external will follow. One critical warning: do not confuse this with being a pushover. Strategic silence is not the same as refusing to address what needs to be addressed. If something requires your voice, use it. What you are eliminating is reactive noise, the unplanned emotional broadcasting that hands others a map to your vulnerabilities. There is a concept in military strategy called OPSEC, operational security. It refers to the practice of identifying what information, if known to an adversary, could be used against you, and then systematically protecting that information. Every general who has ever commanded a successful campaign understood this. And every man who operates in social environments, which is every man alive, is in a theater of operations whether he knows it or not. Robert Cialdini, in his landmark book Influence, a text studied by everyone from marketers to diplomats to therapists, identifies reciprocity, commitment, and liking as the three most powerful human persuasion levers. Here is what he also found. These levers only function when someone has enough information about you to know which one to pull. Full transparency is not virtue. It is vulnerability mistaken for virtue. Think about your most painful betrayals for a moment. Not to relive them, to audit them. In almost every case, the person who hurt you most was not a stranger. It was someone you gave comprehensive access to. Someone who knew your dreams, your fears, your history, your weak spots. And when self-interest eventually outweighed loyalty, as it does for most people in most situations, they had everything they needed to operate against you. Social exchange theory, developed by sociologists Thibault and Kelly, proposes that human relationships are fundamentally governed by a cost-benefit analysis that operates largely below conscious awareness. People stay in relationships as long as the perceived rewards outweigh the perceived costs. This is not cynicism. This is empirical sociology. Understanding this does not mean you become suspicious of everyone. It means you become strategic about access. Think of your inner world as a building with multiple floors. The ground floor is public. Your professional presence, your general values, your surface personality. Guests are welcome here. The upper floors are where your real architecture lives, your fears, your financial situation, your relationship conflicts, your deepest ambitions. Those floors are not open to everyone just because they asked nicely. Different people earn different levels of access. And access is earned through demonstrated reliability over time, not through emotional intensity in the moment. Here is the exercise. And this one requires complete honesty. List 5 people in your life right now who have significant information about your vulnerabilities. Now, for each one, ask, have they demonstrated through consistent behavior over time that they are trustworthy with that information? Or did they simply seem trustworthy in a moment of connection? There is a profound difference between those two things. Acute bonding, deep, fast connection in emotional moments, often creates the illusion of long-term reliability. It is one of the most consistently exploited features of human social cognition. Slow your trust. Build it like a bridge, not a firework. One final warning on this. There is a version of this principle that produces isolation, not strength. The goal is not to close yourself off entirely. Depth of connection is one of the most important factors in long-term mental and physical health. The Harvard study of adult development, which tracked men for 80 years, concluded that relationship quality was the single greatest predictor of late-life health and happiness. Vulnerability with the right people at the right time is not weakness, it is wisdom. Less access for most, real depth for a few. That is not loneliness. That is the architecture of a life that cannot be easily dismantled. In 1975, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan began developing what would become one of the most validated frameworks in motivational psychology, self-determination theory. Their research identified 3 core human psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Notice what is not on that list. Approval. Approval seeking is not a core psychological need. It is an adaptation, a learned strategy that forms when our actual needs are not being met in healthy ways. We learn that if we perform correctly, if we shape ourselves to the expectations of others, We get the validation that temporarily soothes the deeper hunger. The problem is that approval is borrowed oxygen. It requires constant renewal from an external source. And any time your supply line can be cut, by one person's bad mood, by one failed performance, by one rejection, you suffocate. That is not freedom. That is a very comfortable cage. Imagine this. You walk into a room knowing that nothing anyone says about you tonight will change your direction tomorrow morning. Nothing. Not the praise, not the criticism, not the silence. You move through the room like a man who knows where he is going and has simply stopped by, not arrived. How do you think you would carry yourself? How much lighter would your shoulders be? That version of you exists. You are just being blocked from him by a habit that formed before you were conscious enough to choose it. Research from the field of clinical psychology consistently shows that individuals with high approval dependence are not just uncomfortable with rejection, they are neurologically vulnerable to it. Brain imaging studies have shown that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. And just like pain, repeated exposure without healthy coping creates hypersensitivity. The more you need approval, the more it hurts to be without it. The more desperately you pursue it, the more you compromise yourself in the process. This is the cycle, and it runs quietly in the background of almost every decision you make. Marcus Aurelius, who as Roman emperor occupied one of the most approval-saturated environments in human history, wrote in his private journals, now published as Meditations, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." He wrote that 2,000 years ago. It still describes most of the men walking the earth today. Here is the most important exercise in this entire video. For the next 30 days, implement what I call the approval audit. Every time you make a decision, from what to say in a conversation, to how to spend your weekend, to what project to pursue, ask yourself this single question: am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid of how I will be perceived if I don't? Write down the answer. Be honest. You will be shocked at the percentage of your daily life that is being quietly narrated by an imaginary audience. The goal is not to become indifferent to everyone. The goal is to relocate the seat of your approval from the gallery of other people's opinions to the private courtroom of your own values and judgment. Do not overcorrect into contrarianism. There is an immature version of approval independence that is simply approval seeking in reverse, deliberately rejecting what others value to prove you don't need their validation. That is still about them. True autonomy is not performed. It is quiet. It is the man who does what he does because it aligns with who he is, and he would do it whether anyone was watching or not. The moment you genuinely stop needing approval, you will begin attracting more genuine respect than any amount of performance could have generated. People are drawn to self-contained men the way they are drawn to a lighthouse, not because it is performing for them, but because it is simply reliably doing what it does. In 1901, Theodore Roosevelt suffered what historians describe as the most devastating year of his life. He lost his mother and his young wife on the same day. He was 25 years old, and the grief was so complete that he wrote in his diary that night, "The light has gone out of my life." He did not collapse. He went to North Dakota. He bought a cattle ranch. He spent 2 years in radical solitude, working the land, reading, thinking, building himself from the raw materials of his own interior life. The man who returned was unrecognizable from the man who left. Harder, clearer, more decisive, and more compassionate, paradoxically, not less. Theodore Roosevelt went on to become, by most historians' assessments, one of the greatest leaders the United States has ever produced. The world has convinced most men that solitude is a deficit, that if your social calendar is not full, something is wrong with you. That busyness equals value. That isolation equals failure. It has never been more wrong about anything. Neurological research from Harvard Medical School has identified what they call the default mode network. the region of the brain that activates during periods of quiet, undistracted rest. It is the network responsible for future planning, self-reflection, creativity, and the integration of complex emotional experiences. It requires downtime to function. Every time you fill that downtime with noise, social media, constant socializing, entertainment, you are preventing that network from doing its most essential work. You are literally blocking your own capacity to think clearly, plan strategically, and know yourself. Here is the pattern I see repeatedly in men who are living at far below their potential. They are afraid of their own thoughts, not consciously, but the moment the noise stops, an anxiety begins, a vague, sourceless discomfort that drives them back toward stimulation, because in the quiet, they can hear the gap between who they are and who they know they should be. That gap is not an accusation, it is a compass. What solitude offers is not punishment, it is precision. In the absence of other people's opinions, expectations, and narratives, you can finally hear your own. You can begin to identify what you actually value versus what you've been conditioned to value. You can build a vision for your life that belongs to you rather than being assembled from pieces of what you thought would impress others. The exercise. Block out 2 hours this week, not 20 minutes, with no phone, no music, no podcasts. Sit with a notepad. Write answers to 3 questions. First, what would I pursue with my full energy if I knew no one would ever know about it? Second, what am I tolerating in my current life that I would never accept if I respected myself more? Third, what is the single most important step I could take in the next 30 days toward the version of my life that actually makes me proud? Do not answer these quickly. Sit with them. Let the discomfort of not having an immediate answer teach you something about yourself. Naval Ravikant, the philosopher and entrepreneur, has said that the single most important quality for long-term success is the ability to sit with discomfort, to delay gratification, and to think in decades rather than weeks. Most men never access this mode. They live in reaction. They make decisions based on how they feel in a given moment rather than who they are trying to become over the course of years. The man you are building, through the discipline of emotional regulation, through the architecture of trust, through freedom from approval, through strategic solitude, that man is not a product of a single video or a single week. He is a product of daily decisions made quietly, without applause, often without visible results for months or years. And that is precisely why most men never become him. Because the crowd wants to see the transformation before it commits to the process. And real transformation never works that way. One last warning, and this one matters more than any of the others. This path, done incorrectly, produces coldness without wisdom, distance without depth, and strength without the ability to connect. That is not power. That is armor mistaken for identity. The goal, always, is a man who is strong enough to be gentle when it serves, strategic enough to be open when it is safe, private enough to have depth, and present enough to be genuinely known by the few who earn it. Let me bring this home. You came into this video carrying something. Maybe it was the weight of a recent wound. Maybe it was a quiet frustration that has been building for years. The sense that you keep showing up and the world keeps taking advantage of your showing up. What I hope you are leaving with is something different. Not bitterness, not paranoia, not a harder exterior over an unchanged interior. What I hope you are leaving with is a new relationship with your own experience. Your pain is curriculum. Your emotional regulation is your superpower. Your boundaries around access and trust are not walls. They are architecture. Your independence from approval is not arrogance. It is sovereignty. Your comfort with silence and solitude is not failure. It is the laboratory where your best self gets built. These are not abstract ideas. They are practices. And every practice requires the same thing: decision, repetition, and patience with the process, even when the results are not yet visible. The Roman Emperor Hadrian, one of the most strategically brilliant leaders in history, had a phrase inscribed at the entrance to his private study. It translates roughly as, "The man who masters himself has conquered the only territory that matters." That conquest is available to you today, not when circumstances change, not when you get the break you've been waiting for, not when the people around you finally see what you're worth. Right now, with what you have, in the life you are already living, here is your challenge. Not a comment to type, not a box to check, a real challenge. Tonight, identify one pattern, one habitual response, one recurring decision, one area of your life where you are giving something away that you cannot afford to keep giving. And tomorrow, change it. Not perfectly, not completely, just different enough that you know something shifted. The compound interest of small, consistent upgrades to how you carry yourself through the world is more powerful than any dramatic transformation. The man you are becoming is assembled one deliberate choice at a time. If this gave you something real, share it with one person who you believe needs to hear it. If you want to go deeper, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next video goes further into territory most channels are too afraid to explore. The world will keep moving at its pace. Noisy, chaotic, indifferent. And you, the composed, deliberate, self-directed man you are choosing to become, will move at yours. Not louder, just different. And that difference will change everything.